The sun was barely up when the first hint of trouble arrived. A crisp, autumn morning, the kind that whispers, promises of change, yet betrays with the sharpness of its cold air. I had always loved the quiet solitude of those early hours, sipping coffee on my porch, wrapped in a wool sweater. But that day, tranquility was a fleeting promise, stolen by the approaching rumble of an HOA van. My neighborhood was a tapestry of well-manicured lawns and pastel-hued houses, each one a replica of the next, a uniformity that brought comfort to some. But for me, it was a gentle reminder of a life once dictated by rules, now a life of my choosing. That is, until Karen moved in 2 doors down. Karen was the HOA president, a title she wore with the same pride a knight might feel for his armor. Her reign was one of meticulous control, ensuring every blade of grass bowed to her will. But, like all things too tightly wound, there was something in her that was bound to snap. It started small, a note about my lawn. Typed in the same precise font as the HOA newsletter, I found it pinned to my door one morning, fluttering like a trapped butterfly. I smiled as I read it. My grass was perhaps an inch too tall, an oversight on my part, easily remedied. It wasn't worth the ink it was printed on, but it was Karen's subtle way of marking her territory. I trimmed the grass that afternoon, the fresh scent mingling with the autumn leaves, and thought nothing more of it. But Karen was far from satisfied with compliance. She craved acknowledgement, a curtsy before the crowned queen of the cul-de-sac. A week later, I found her standing at the edge of my driveway, examining my mailbox with the same scrutiny one might reserve for a museum artifact. Her eyes met mine, and there, it was the unspoken challenge. I met her gaze with a nod and passed by without a word. Diplomacy in the form of silence. But it was the installation of the Wi-Fi antenna that truly tested the boundaries. It appeared one morning, perched on my roof like an unwelcome guest. I noticed it during my morning routine, the metal gleaming against the sky like a bizarre steeple. A notice from the HOA had followed, claiming it was for the benefit of the neighborhood. An improvement. They said, an advancement, conveniently omitting permission. I stood in the yard, looking up at the contraption, the absurdity of it all wrapping around me like a thick fog. My house, my sanctuary, now an unwilling beacon in Karen's network of control. A silent fury simmered beneath my calm exterior as the neighborhood awoke, unaware of the quiet rebellion brewing. For now, I let it linger, this affront. But unlike the grass, this wasn't as easily trimmed. My mind turned over the possibilities like a jeweler examining a stone, looking for just the right angle to catch the light. There was, after all, more than one way to flip the script in this suburban saga. As the sun climbed higher and the world around me stirred, I resolved there would be a reckoning, quiet and powerful, like the turning of the seasons. I would wait for the right moment, and when it came, it would be Karen's turn to be blindsided by the very rules she held dear. A brisk wind whispered through the autumn leaves as I stood in my front yard, surveying the latest affront to my domicile. The HOA had gone too far this time. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of our neighborhood's unwritten codes, had begun her campaign of petty intimidation. It was laughable, really, how she scurried about, clipboard in hand, like a vigilant squirrel hoarding grievances for the winter. It started with a letter, much like the fallen leaves that littered my lawn, demanding I trim my hedges to a regulation height. I found it tucked neatly under my doormat one morning, a missive of manicured malice. I could almost see Karen's tight-lipped smile as she penned her passive-aggressive prose. The demands grew more absurd, a citation for the color of my door, which she deemed an unapproved shade of blue, too bold for community harmony. Another for a bicycle left carelessly in the driveway, though it stood on my property, a silent testament to my son's childhood adventures. Karen's iron grip knew no bounds, reaching into the heart of my home, judging the minutiae of my existence. The absurdity of it all was almost poetic. Karen's obsession with order masked a chaos of its own. I could see it in her eyes when we crossed paths, that flicker of insecurity cloaked in overcompensation. The HOA meetings had become her stage, and she played her part with relish, orchestrating her symphony of control with each rule she enforced. As the days crept by, the gossip spread like wildfire. Karen's whispers echoed through the cul-de-sac, carried by the wind into the ears of those eager for scandal. They spoke of my rebellious ways, painting a portrait of a man who defied the sacred covenant of community living. It was a curious thing, watching how quickly neighbors adopted her narrative, their curiosity morphing into a wary distance. Yet, beneath the surface, my quiet resolve simmered. Karen's attempts to box me into her paper-thin ideals would not break me. My mind churned, crafting a plan as intricate as the web she wove around us all. I would not be the outsider in my own story, not when the truth lay in the tangled wires of the unauthorized Wi-Fi system perched atop my roof, an emblem of my unintended rebellion. I watched as Karen's machinations unfolded, her attempts to provoke a reaction as transparent as glass, but I stayed silent, biding my time. There was power in patience, a quiet strength in allowing her folly to unravel. Each letter, each whisper, only fueled my determination. Then, the moment arrived. A climax in the theater of the absurd, a meeting, called to order beneath the fluorescent glare of the community center, where Karen sought to cement her dominion. My turn to speak came. The room hushed with a collective anticipation. I raised the issue of the Wi-Fi, the unauthorized structure that glued Karen's narrative together, the heart of her crusade. A singular line broke the silence, calculated and cool, cutting through the air with the precision of a scalpel. The monthly bill is due. Her facade cracked, just a little, the color draining from her face as the implications settled in, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The seeds of doubt sown among the gathered crowd. I had flipped the script, and now they looked at her, not me, with questioning eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the very community she sought to control, she knew the scales had tipped, and all it took was a simple reversal of the narrative, a reminder that sometimes those who wait hold the greatest power. The summer morning felt unusually serene as I sat on my porch, the sun draping itself over the neighborhood like a comforting shawl. The anger that had simmered within me like a cauldron was now an ice-cold resolve. Karen and her HOA cronies had overstepped, installing their Wi-Fi gear on my roof as if it were their birthright, but I had let the rage distill into something far more potent. Weeks of meticulous documentation lay spread before me, a testament to my purpose. Photos of the installation, minutes from HOA meetings, and copies of every email exchange, my arsenal for the upcoming confrontation. I wasn't one for grand speeches or dramatic gestures. I preferred the subtlety of a checkmate in a game of chess. And, the game was afoot. I had quietly consulted with a lawyer, her eyes glinting with interest as I laid out my predicament. She had confirmed my suspicions I was well within my rights to charge the HOA for their unauthorized use of my property. It was akin to renting out an attic without the owner's consent. I smiled at the irony. They had tried to pull a fast one, only to find themselves ensnared in their own web. The first invoice had been sent last month, a polite yet firm demand for payment, calculated down to the last kilobyte they had siphoned off my goodwill. I knew it would rattle them. It was a quiet ripple in their otherwise placid pond of suburban control. The response was inevitable, a hurried knock on my door. A flustered HOA representative with apologies spilling out of his mouth like coins from a broken slot machine. Inside, I maintained a veneer of politeness, a perfect mask for the storm inside. This was my stage, and I would not falter. The HOA had underestimated the quiet man on the corner, the one who preferred books over barbecues, solitude over social gatherings. They had mistaken silence for acquiescence. The days unfolded like a slow-moving play, each act building towards the inevitable climax. A second invoice followed, and with it, the first signs of their compliance, a small payment, perhaps an attempt to pacify me, arrived under the guise of an administrative oversight fee, a token, but one that confirmed my leverage. But it wasn't about the money. It was about respect and reclaiming my autonomy in a community that had blurred the lines between oversight and intrusion. I spent my evenings on the porch, the summer air heavy with anticipation. I watched as Karen's crew scuttled about like ants disturbed from their hill, their attempts to rectify the situation bordering on comedic. They had yet to realize that they were players in a game they did not understand, one they could not win by the conventional rules they clung to so dearly. Finally, the meeting came, an emergency HOA session, where they would undoubtedly try to paint me as the unreasonable party. I attended, not to defend myself, but to observe, to witness their attempts at salvaging dignity in the face of self-inflicted chaos. As the chair droned on about community values and unity, I tuned out. My thoughts wandered to the horizon, where the sun dipped below the line, painting the sky in hues of defiance and victory. It was a reminder, a promise of the days to come when I could sit in my porch, undisturbed. The weight of the HOA's transgressions lifted like a heavy fog. In the end, they would pay, not just in dollars, but in the silent acknowledgement of their defeat. And I, the quiet man with the unexpected cunning, would simply flip the script and watch as they danced to the tune of my making. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long fingers of sunshine across the kitchen table. I could see the Wi-Fi equipment perched like an unwanted guest on my roof through the window, its blinking lights a silent taunt. The HOA, spearheaded by Karen and her self-assured tyranny, had overstepped my boundaries. It was time for a quiet rebellion. I set my coffee mug down, the clink against the wood barely noticeable against the rush of thoughts in my head, the calm before the storm. This was not about being right. It was about reclaiming respect, space, and the sanctity of one's roof. A person's home is their castle, even in suburbia, where every lawn competes for supremacy. I picked up the phone with an air of purpose, dialing the one number that promised change. The lawyer's voice on the line was steady, measured, a grounding anchor in the sea of my simmering frustrations. I explained the situation, the trespass, the boldness of Karen's unilateral decision to use my property to host the HOA's latest amenity. It was technical trespass. I was told a small victory, but a potent one. The paperwork was drawn up swiftly, a letter, crafted with the precision of a scalpel, outlining the terms a monthly charge for their equipment's residence on my roof. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could almost see Karen's face when she'd read it. That moment of realization, as sweet as a ripe fruit, hanging just out of reach. A silent chuckle escaped me at the thought. Days passed with deceptive stillness, the sea calm before the tempest. I found myself musing over the nature of rules, those invisible lines drawn and redrawn by power and consent. Karen's reign had been one of unchecked authority, her gaze ever watchful over lawns and mailboxes, dictating paint colors and garden gnomes. But this was different. She had touched my home. The inevitable meeting came, a gathering of suburban generals at the clubhouse, a place that always smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Karen, seated at the head of the table, her expression a mask of practiced neutrality. The others, the foot soldiers of the HOA, murmured in their seats. My letter was read aloud, each word a stone dropped into the quiet pond of the room, ripples spreading. The silence was punctuated by the rustle of papers, the shifting of eyes, the realization dawning like an unwelcome sunrise. And then, a single line from Karen, her voice brittle as winter branches. This is unprecedented. Unprecedented. The word hung in the air, a testament to the limits of her imagination. I left the clubhouse with a sense of resolve, the rustle of leaves whispering secrets in the wind as I walked home. The world felt sharper, clearer, the air charged with possibility. I thought of my roof, envisioning it bare again, free of its technological squatter. It would happen. In time. I had flipped the script, and in doing so, I'd carved out a new line in the sand, visible only to those who dared to look. The cold light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of muted gold across my living room floor. It was the morning after the storm of emails, the night of whispers that had turned the entire neighborhood into a silent battleground. The HOA meeting was hours away, but its gravity was already pulling at the corners of my mind. Today, I would face Karen. The decision to charge the HOA monthly for their unauthorized Wi-Fi installation on my roof had been both simple and radical, a masterstroke of quiet rebellion. It was a chess move that Karen, with her predictable authoritarian stance, had not anticipated. Her emails had grown increasingly desperate, her tone oscillating between condescension and veiled threats. But I remained calm, buoyed by the law firm's assurances that my position was legally sound. I watched the neighborhood wake up. Mrs. Henderson watered her garden, oblivious to the simmering discord. Children scrambled onto school buses, their laughter cutting through the crisp air. It was a community that deserved better, one that didn't need Karen's overbearing shadow cast across every front porch. As I stepped into the HOA meeting room later that morning, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The usual cacophony of greetings was replaced by a subdued murmur. Karen stood at the front, her posture rigid, her smile more a baring of teeth than a gesture of warmth. But behind her facade, I saw the flicker of uncertainty. When the floor opened, I seized it. My words were measured, deliberate. I spoke of community, of respect for personal boundaries, of the importance of consent. I painted Karen's actions with the colors of intrusion and arrogance, underscoring the significance of my decision not as an act of defiance, but as a necessary stand. The room listened, a collective breath held. Karen's eyes narrowed, but I could sense the weight of the room shifting away from her, aligning with the quiet truth of my words. And then, in a moment of unexpected clarity, someone from the back spoke, a single line that punctuated the air, sharp and undeniable. "We need a change." That was the turning point, not my words, but the collective realization that change was not only inevitable but necessary. Karen's influence had cracked, fractured by the cumulative weight of her own overreach and the neighborhood's simmering discontent. The meeting closed with murmurs of agreement, nods of newfound solidarity. Karen, sidelined, her authority eclipsed by her own hubris, stood like a fading storm, her power diminished. As I walked home, the air felt lighter, the future brighter. The neighborhood seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, a collective exhale of freedom. The Wi-Fi, now a symbol of reclaimed autonomy, would serve as a reminder of the strength found in quiet resistance. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the Wi-Fi itself. It was about asserting a truth that resonated through every street and home, that power should never be wielded without accountability, and that even the quietest of voices can echo with the force of change.